Today, exploitation and trafficking very often begin online in gaming chats, social media, DM, messaging apps that we hand to our kids, thinking that they're safe because they're at home. So, in this episode, we're asking how do we protect childhood while still respecting privacy and free speech? And what would it look like, perhaps, if we admitted that the real internet age is not 13, but it's actually 16? And the anchor of our conversation today is going to be the Policy Circle brief on protecting children. And you can find this on the policycircle.org in the Policy Hub. So I hope that this conversation will give you all the courage to engage on this topic. And today I am joined by my amazing co-host, Melinda Oakes. Hi, Melinda.
Hi, Sylvie. Thank you so much for inviting me to this super important conversation. And I know that you're aware that I have a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old at home. So I'm in the thick of this on a personal level. And I just want to say that I found the policy brief to be bursting with helpful and informative information. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm so excited for this conversation. And our guest today is Dawn Hawkins, who's the former CEO of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And if there's one person who understands the human impact, the policy landscape, it's Dawn. So, Dawn, I'm so honored that you are joining us today.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
All right, well, let's jump in and get started talking about the story that was shared in the policy brief. There's a story that opens up the brief, and it's about a young man named James who's 14 years old. He logs into a popular multiplayer game and meets a teammate. And this person praises his skills, sends him digital gifts, moves the conversation off the game into a private chat. And then over a few weeks, that friendship turns into pressure and comments like, send me a picture of yourself, which ultimately result in threats that if you don't send me the picture, I'll share what you've already sent and you don't do what I've asked you to do. So eventually the predator convinces him to meet in person. And what started as a gaming, sometimes many parents thinking it's very harmless, but a gaming situation becomes something more than that. And it's a path to real world sexual exploitation.
Yeah, and I mean that's a real story that was covered by ABC, and then we know it's not rare. There's a in the brief actually we cite Torrance research. 1 in 5 teens report experiencing sextortion, and 1 in 7 young adults who experience sextortion as a minor said that they harmed themselves in response to that. So, Dawn, the cyber tip line at the National Center on Missing and Endangered Children has had over 20 million reports in 1 year, and most of them starting on social media and gaming platform. So, tell us a little bit more about the landscape here. What's happening?
Yeah, I mean, this is so common. I know of hundreds of these kinds of stories. I mean, even stories in my own kind of extended family that are similar. We call this online enticement, which is really any situation where a child is groomed for sexual exploitation or abduction online through digital communication. And this is a massive kind of share of the caseload for anybody who's working with minors right now. I think the important thing to understand is that predators and those who want to harm children go wherever our children are. And right now, our youth are hanging out online. And a lot of these platforms that have been created for youth, especially some of the gaming ones, the social media platforms, they haven't created, safety nets to help protect kids from the dangerous content and the dangerous people that they'll see. And so until that happens, until these platforms are designed really with more safety in mind and more tools for parents, we're going to continue to see these numbers just explode, sadly.
I think there's a real shift that needs to happen as parents, as adults, is that we used to tell people and be really afraid of the outside world, right? Don't talk to strangers in the parks, like stranger alert, like this is the warnings. But we don't do the same as consistently as warning kids of what could be happening online. And we're giving kids these tools. And I've done this myself to my kids without that much rules and warnings about what could happen. And I think it's good to zoom out because in the brief, this is something that's really covered, is that childhood has changed fundamentally. And Dawn, I'd love for you to weigh in, but in 2025, today, 95% of the US teens own a smartphone. And kids spend about 7.5 hours a day, which is unreal to me. I don't know how we could do this, but it does happen on screens for entertainment. And 1 in 3 internet users globally is under 18. So that's an entire generation that's growing up online. And it just transforms what our kids are living. So Dawn, I'd love for you to weigh into what that means.
I think that's a really key point there is thinking about it differently. I think as when we're not digital natives, when we didn't grow up online, we think of it as two different worlds, but our young people see it as one continuous world, right? The online experience is not so different from what they're experiencing offline. It's just a fluid, existence for them. And so as parents, grandparents, caregivers, we need to think of it that way. And that the environment that they see is not neutral. It's really important to understand too. I think as parents sometimes and grandparents, we don't think that our kids are going to see the things they do because we're not seeing it ourselves. But the algorithms and the places that we go, even if it's the same platform, you guys, it's such a different experience. Pornography, hate speech, extremism, violence, it's like the wallpaper of our kids' lives, and they're seeing it without seeking it out. We've got, pornography websites. They take a pretty large share of the web, and 13 to 20% of all searches lead to explicit content. We've got 73% of teens who say that they've viewed pornography, and 58% say their first exposure was unintentional. I'm certain that number's actually way higher for teens right now. That's asking people in their 20s, not who are teens at this moment. 1 in 6 young people experience sexual abuse online before age 18. 70% of our young people have seen real life violent content online. 65% have witnessed hate speech. Again, this is really the wallpaper of their lives. And so helping them to walk through it, make sense of it, and try to avoid it is really key.
Dawn, I really appreciate how you put that to words, the way that we as adults are going through the technology era in a different way than children are, and how they see it as something completely different, something fluid, as you said. I haven't really thought much about how we look at it differently. So that's really helpful in terms of framing it. And it reminds me of something that Jonathan Haidt calls the great rewiring of childhood. And there's a terrific article that he penned or about him in the policy brief that's just really great. And one of the key points that he says is that kids are overprotected in the physical world and underprotected online. And the result is a mental health crisis. Right now, the CDC is reporting that nearly 1 in 3 teen girls has seriously considered suicide. Teen depression has risen sharply since the early smartphone era. And there's an overall 60% increase in depression, but 145% amongst girls. So teens are online late at night with their phones in their bed. Their sleep is disrupted, and they're subject to constant comparison between themselves and polished images and influencers. And it's just an impossible comparison. It's a difficult way to go through life for these young people. I feel so bad for them.
And Don, maybe you could speak to this, but there's also this idea that the neuroscience, right, explains that this is really addictive, and it changes the pathways. I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit, but in terms of how it impacts our children.
Think about our own use of the internet too, and how addictive it can feel for us. Like, I love those reels, the TikTok videos, and sometimes I just get stuck in them, right? And it's like entertaining and exciting, emotional. But like, I personally sometimes have a hard time turning it off. And because the dopamine levels I'm just getting a constant hit of this, like the oxytocin, the dopamine. And if you think about that with our children who don't don't have fully formed, prefrontal cortexes yet, who aren't able to see beyond like the immediate gratification or the long-term consequences, it's even harder for them to break away. And when I was talking about kind of the algorithmic stuff, I think it's really the TikTok. If we just take TikTok as an example, again, I also like enjoy TikTok, but they're really good at keeping us engaged. And there are a number of lawsuits against them right now for the impact on kids. And one of the things that came out in the Massachusetts Attorney General lawsuit is TikTok agreed to reset the algorithm after 10 minutes, but they would only reset it for 10 minutes. And then it goes right back into the same algorithm that was keeping the kids connected and attached and logged on. And the thing is we're up against these like massive algorithms and companies and profits that know what's happening to our brain, and they try to keep us on and engaged. And so that's really hard to compete with. And then if you add pornography, there is a whole wealth of neuroscience about the impact pornography has on the brain, especially the developing brain, that really keeps you connected. Like the physical gratification that you feel when you're engaged in an intimate act with another human being, you can still feel when you're watching pornography, but instead of becoming connected to another human, you're connecting with pixels on a screen. And so you keep wanting that dopamine rush and you keep coming back. And I think it's helpful as parents to really understand that physical change that's happening. It rewires circuits in their brains. There's so many fights in our homes, I think, about turn off the game, turn off the screen, but also understanding the impact that it's having on their brain can help us help them better.
Yeah, I mean, it's at this point, it's not just a parenting issue, and I think that's what you bring to light, right? It's a public health, it's civic leadership, civic development issue, and I think the brief also dives into, and we have to talk a little bit about it, is how AI is pouring gasoline on this, because now these algorithms, like you were just alluding to, are so intelligent that they can make this addiction and serve you exactly what you want and what increases that dopamine and that engagement. So like how do you categorize these kind of amplification that AI allows?
I am so excited about AI and all the good that it can do. And even I've had some fun like interactions with AI with my kids and family. But there's some really massive concerns and harms that we're seeing. So one is that algorithmic amplification that you're talking about. It knows us so extremely well and knows what keeps us emotionally engaged, and it will keep feeding that. So with minors, what we're seeing is like that body image kind of accounts, the extreme dieting, the self-harm, the radicalization, these kinds of things continue to be amplified thanks to AI. And until we do something to help, I would say we need these companies to be regulated, especially in how they're using AI to amplify content to young people. That's key. Another area of massive concern is this area of AI companions or AI chatbots. And you guys, this is really key. They're marketed as friends, as therapists, and there's some good that's coming from it. I haven't seen any good, though, in the research literature for youth. It's all showing like some significant harms. But 72% of our teenagers have interacted with an AI chatbot already. And most of us adults haven't at all, so we don't even understand what we're talking about.
I know it's crazy. That's the most used of AI. Like OpenAI came out with some research saying like 60% of users are actually for personal use and chatbot friend interaction. It's crazy.
Well, but in 32, there's a study that showed that 32% of the interactions with the chatbots were endorsing harmful suggestions. So sadly, I know of 23 cases where the chatbots encourage self-harm to a minor, even suicide, and the young people did it. And those are just ones that I know and that have kind of come out and are in the news. There's so many more. And our young people are very susceptible. It feels so real talking to these bots. Like it feels like you're talking to your favorite celebrity or to someone who really gets you. And when you think about our young people and how much they really want to feel connected and seen and understood, it explains why they're more vulnerable to those. The other area of concern is AI-generated child sexual abuse material. Reports of AI-generated CSAM went from 4,700 to 67,000 between 2023 to 2024. It's in like the many millions already in the first 6 months of 2025. A lot of this is because of these AI nudifying apps or deepfake apps. Sylvie, recently I found 9 AI nudifying apps on the Google and Apple Play Store rated for age 4 and 9-year-olds. And this is so mind-blowing. I mean, in January last year, I had a mom call me whose 5th grade daughter had almost 1,000 AI-generated CSAM images made of her. But it was made by another 5th grader. Another 5th grader did it. And, this is the explosive problem, the crisis that we cannot ignore, and we have to do something about it. And everyone needs to be part of it. Apple and Google, for example, shouldn't be allowing these in the App Store, especially not rated for minors. And then there's this AI-driven kind of misinformation. We ourselves, but especially teens, are fooled and manipulated by content, and man, it hallucinates. It gets things wrong sometimes. It gives poor advice. And so if we are emotionally attached to these AI bots and we're willing to follow it, and I'm not like it gets me too. It gets me too. It's not just teens.
Well, you talk about getting emotionally attached. That's actually the data point that stood out the most to me, and what I found to be most shocking is that 20% of high schoolers reported having or knowing someone who has had an actual relationship with an AI chatbot. And it just seems so unhealthy. On top of that, AI is accelerating everything that was already harmful and making it cheaper and faster and easier to scale.
Want us to talk about a little bit about age on the internet. And Dawn, it was you in our conversation, or actually in your review of the brief, that you brought this up, is that the de facto age of the internet is 13 from federal laws that just happened. But actually, all of this research and all of this harm that Jonathan Nath and other researchers have pointed is that actually the age should be 16 is what should be the age before, because that's the age at which you could discern. You could discern using the consequences of using these apps, the consequences of interacting with an AI chatbot, although maybe not actually. But I don't know, like, Dawn, walk us through and want to explain to our listeners this age, because there's a lot of initiatives around waiting until 8th grade, which is still 13, 14. And now there's advocacy going on around, well, maybe it should be 16. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, given everything that we talked before of the dangers of being online beyond just having your phone, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's helpful to understand the history. So a law was passed in 1998 called COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. It's one of the core pillars of the internet and of our young people's experiences online. It was initially, the bill itself is a privacy bill, and it's saying that under age 13, tech companies can't collect data on you without parental permission and target you with ads. It's, really critical and important. A lot of companies are finding ways around it. They're breaking this law. Anyway, that's another point of discussion. But one of the problems that happened, an inadvertent consequence of this bill, was that it essentially accidentally, I think by Congress, set the digital age of adulthood at age 13. And so all these platforms for the last 25 years have been developing their platforms with the mindset that they only have to worry about kids under 13, and over 13, you're practically an adult. They don't need a different experience, nothing like that. But we know that's so not true. I mean, if you're around kids at all, you understand 13 is not I mean, they're kind of goofy at that age. I have a 12-year-old right now, and he's like amazing and so incredible, but not able to like make really solid, quick decisions, you know? But the research shows that also. I really think 16 is key. 18 for some things are important, but there's a constant debate. And right now, one of my fears, one of the things I'm working on is Congress needs to update COPPA. And so there's a COPPA 2.0 that has been trying to get across the finish line for a couple of years. It does so much good when it comes to like data and privacy and all these things. But the worst part of this Set 2.0 is it just cements the digital age of adulthood at 13, and it completely removes parents from any part of the equation. And so I find that really problematic. Like, kind of the core problem of the internet is setting the age at 13, and something that we should push back on.
I've noticed with the 13 to the 16 years old is that a lot of the kids' depression, a lot of the harm, the cyberbullying that becomes really impactful, it doesn't stop actually at 16, right? It's like through 18. And there's a component of this is how do we get our families and our children to really be able to be resilient in what's happening in the digital world. And I think that conversation is not really happening. So I feel like that's something that communities need to be having, and maybe it's more like labeling on the actual platforms in terms of the consequences of what could be happening to you when you're using them, right? There's no warning signs around these platforms. And Dawn, I know you've done a lot of advocacy, but there's no really conversations around warning the user and the content producer, like when you're putting up content, what can happen to this content? What are the rules of the road on these platforms? And that's not something that's part of the conversation. So
One of like the most powerful experiences I had was with a family member who was 12 years old, shouldn't have been on social media at all. He was snuck around it. And he shared a video of himself that, he thought he was sending it to someone he knew and trusted. It was absolutely a stranger who wanted to harm him. But when I explained to him that that video is going to be shared again and again, like his little heart broke. You could see he was so upset about how he was duped. And he kind of just kept saying that, like, they told me it wouldn't. How could it happen? And that became like just such a strong realization to me that we adults too, we need to be told. We need to, be informed about what's happening, what can happen. And that's not happening enough. I think I've had some conversations with tech companies who are doing it a little bit more, a little bit better. I think some of the AI out there is trying to do it well and better than we have for the last 25 years. I'm optimistic, Sylvie, that is shifting, but that would make such a difference, just helping us make more informed decisions.
And if we shift our conversation to policy, because this is where there's is it self-regulation? Is it companies taking into, now that we know the effect and the addiction and the negative effect of the worst happens online, right? And companies know that. And now that we know that, should they be able to self-regulate, put up warning sign, warn their users of whatever they put online? It's never private. It can end up on anyone's computer, and it could be propagated until the end of times. Should they put those warnings out to their users because they are aware of it? Or should they be regulations? And those are government policies and directives that will influence behavior. And I think that's part of the policy circle, is to really help people understand who does what in our system, what's happening at the federal level, and what's happening in the state. So, Dawn, I know you, and we touched already a little bit on COPPA, but explain what are the laws that are in the books right now at the federal level, and then we'll go into what are the gaps and what is going on in the state, which is a patchwork of laws to protect their citizens. But that starts with the big pillars of, at the federal level, what's already there, and maybe we could say, well, what needs to be next?
So federally, we're very weak. Congress really hasn't passed a significant online safety bill in 27 years now. COPPA was 1998. That's the data privacy. SIPA, the Children's Internet Protection Act, was passed, trying to protect kids from obscene content, indecent exposure to things in schools and libraries. And it provides really critical funding for libraries and schools to have filters, but it's so outdated, and it hasn't kept up with the newer technologies. You know, the fact that we're giving iPads and Chromebooks to kids to take home, and using technology in different ways. So it massively needs to be updated. Then there was the Communications Decency Act and another kind of COPA version, meant to protect kids online from harmful content and harmful people. Those bills were found almost entirely unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. One of them, the Communications Decency Act, 27 words were left as constitutional, and that's known as CDA 230. That gives very broad immunity to any platform that has third-party content being uploaded. So like Instagram, for example, they could be immune from content that you upload, Sylvie, even if it's really bad. I know you wouldn't do that, but it's good for these companies to be able to continue and allow us to be able to communicate with each other online and them not be responsible. But it's caused a whole bunch of problems when it comes to kids' online safety, and it hasn't been fixed or updated. Congress has passed some smaller things like funding for what we call the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces and efforts to combat child sexual abuse online. Critical, but like the problem is just super exploding because we're not going upstream to kind of try to solve it. So some funding bills have been passed. And then I'm very excited. I was grateful to work some with you on this, but the Take It Down Act passed earlier this year around image-based sexual abuse. It's primarily targeted to adults, but it does require platforms to remove image-based sexual abuse or child sexual abuse, or child pornography is the legal term, from internet platforms within 48 hours. It's a huge victory, but it's still pretty small considering that Congress hasn't done much in many years. And we can get into why they haven't, if that's helpful. But because Congress hasn't done really anything for that long, states have tried to step in. And we have this patchwork of efforts at the state level trying to bring some kind of sanity and solutions to the online world. And some are working well and some are super not. And it's just caused a lot of complications, I would argue.
I'm super excited to talk about the state actions that have been taken. I know in my state, the bell-to-bell ban on phones has been really tremendously successful so far this year. But I know we're going to save that for a little bit later in the conversation. I was wondering if you can also talk about where the gaps in the federal policies are. I know we just talked about what we're trying to do at the federal level, but what's missing? Do you have some top sort of gaps that you're noticing?
Yeah, I would say critically, we need company platforms to design with safety in mind. So we call it safety by design. And this is a really broad movement that's happening globally, and a lot of other countries are moving this direction. Some states are. But because we don't have any requirement to do safety by design, there's, we're not designing with our kids' well-being in mind. There's no comprehensive duty of care. That would be fixed if we were designing with safety in mind. There's a weak enforcement of COPPA, of our kids' data. And I mean, just this week, I'm really focused right now. I see like the app stores as a critical choke point for how our kids are accessing material online. And that's a place where I think if we could just try to help solve that, it would help a lot. But I found like 320 apps that seem like they're kids' game apps that are not following COPPA, and they're taking tons of our kids' data, selling it, swapping it, things like that, and it's just not enforced. And then there's a lot of confusion with the AI-generated exploitation, and it's not really clear which platforms should be held responsible or who could be. So kind of like where the liability is a huge gap, and we our hands are tied because of that CDA 230 giving massive platforms immunity. And so we're left thinking like, well, who do we demand improves and who do we hold accountable when there's massive harm? Verification is a very hot topic that's also being debated hugely globally at the federal level and at the state level. And there's multiple ways to do age verification. We could get into it, but mainly I'm just here to say we need it. We need it. And there's so many privacy preserving ways to do it. I saw one a couple weeks ago, you guys. It's just like you hold up your hand and they can tell by the way you move your hand if you're an adult or a minor. It's insane. Like you don't have to upload birth certificates and all of this. So, and then there's just not funding for like you were saying, Sylvie, earlier, the literacy side of things and helping us learn and understand what's happening. So I'd say those are the big gaps. But
Section 230 is especially a big one, right? Because the platforms are hiding under or saying, well, we are not responsible for the content being published. And then another side of this is like, well, this is free speech. If the platforms become editor and remove content, we're infringing on individuals' free speech of expressing themselves on these platforms. These platforms, if they start removing and editing content, they become editors. They're not providers of a service, they become editors. And then they fall under a complete different category of rules and responsibilities. And so it's a real issue, and I'm not sure if we're in this how it's going to get resolved. There is one proposal by Senator James Curtis to amend Section 230 to really make companies responsible for the algorithms that present content and lead to harm, as you were describing earlier. But it's not, those are the reasons, right, why Congress is not fixing this, but it should. Right, and maybe you could talk also about the lobbying that's happening and what tech companies want, right?
Yeah, and so there's a bunch of reasons why it's been 27 years since Congress passed the law. Like, yeah, it's a legitimate constitutional concern, especially around the First Amendment. And I love the First Amendment. I want to protect it and defend it. But at the same time, there's just this tension always around a child's safety, what children should have access to or not. It gets hard. But tech lobbying is key. I mean, I was reading that Meta alone spent $18.9 million on 66 lobbyists last year alone. And I think it's a ton more. This year, in 2025, I know of 14 super PACs that have started by big tech, some of them with $100 million given to them to try to stop any kind of regulation around AI. So that's what we're up against. Is the tech lobbying and the tech interests. I think, though, that there's some compromises that we could make. And what I have found, you guys, is if we start pitting the tech companies against each other, I think we've lost because they've been a united front. And as we kind of find things that Apple and Google get behind, but maybe Meta, the other social media companies are not, we can win. And that's what's starting to happen with laws right now. There's 19 child safety bills before Congress this session. So I'm hopeful. And then there's this whole advocacy ecosystem. And again, this kind of goes to the tech lobbying, but a whole bunch of trade associations that are set up to kind of confuse people. Some of them have really confusing names. I don't know if I should say them, but it sounds like they're for parents, they're for families, but really they're paid for by big tech to stop and thwart kind of efforts to give parents and families more safety and control. COPPA is another part of the problem. It's just created this mindset that 13 is the age, and we have to try to help legislators see beyond that, help them understand child development and the brain development. The other huge problem is there is so much agreement on these issues. It's the one issue I think probably the Republicans and Democrats are nearly 100% aligned on. One of the bills, the Kids Online Safety Act, passed 99-1 in the Senate. I mean, how is that possible? But so there's so much agreement, but it's I think the polarization of just the political culture that we've been in the last few years is just causing a lot of the stalling here. And so some of these child safety bills are getting kind of pulled into these larger culture wars. So those are some of the barriers. But again, I like really am optimistic. I've been fighting for like 18 years on the policy front here and haven't had a lot of progress, but now I'm like, yes, we're almost there.
You mentioned that there's 18 bills that are in front of Congress right now. Are they organized in a cohesive way so that they really transform this protection of children online? Like, or are they patchwork, like band-aids to the solution, or is it a full like revamp? Because you've mentioned these laws have been in place like 20 years ago. So there needs to be a new look at it all, right? So are these proposals, if a senator is listening to this, if a lawmaker is listening to this, is there one place where we could say, okay, this is the revamp that's required?
The answer to that is no, but it's also more complicated than that. I mean, we're talking about the tech stack that our kids are experiencing is complicated, complex, it's large. There's not one overarching solution that's going to like protect all our kids generally. Like it's not possible with our legal framework, but also the tech stack. And so we need to look at different areas and points of harm. And so there are 3 bills that I'd argue that if we were able to move them forward without gutting them and making some minor adjustments to them, that it would provide like significant overhaul. So Kids Online Safety Act being one, the App Store Accountability Act, and then COPPA 2.0, but like fix the age 13 problem in it. And that would be just a drastic change towards accountability, better design features, and rights for parents. But the others shouldn't be discounted either, because they do fix very specific narrow problems. What I'm concerned about is that some of the others that are just really narrowly focused are going to be what passes, and not the bigger ones that have more of an impact. So one that, like, just an example I would say is something I've been working on for so long, and that's like protecting kids from exposure to pornography on the big pornography websites. And we got, I think, 22 states now have passed legislation requiring age verification at the pornography website level. And the Supreme Court found it constitutional, so much to celebrate there. But there's a bill in Congress, and Congress should fix it, because having 50 different states versions is complicated to follow. So I would say we need that. It's called the Screen Act, but it's such a narrow part of like the impacts our kids are having. So sadly, there's not one solution that's going to solve everything. Just like there's not one like parental control that's going to solve everything. We have to come at it from different points in the tech stack.
And leveraging technology for age verification. I'd love to shift our conversation a little bit into that safety by design. And, for like the CEOs, the product leads, the investors, this brief and this conversation, I think makes it really clear that it's not just going to be solved by telling parents to establish the guardrails and tell their kids not to do things, right? We need to have that design. We need to build products that, if children are going to use them, whether it's games, social platforms, product designers safety needs to be part of the environment where we know that children will be playing. And we can no longer say, these companies can no longer say, they're neutral and it's just up to the user and up to the parents to figure it out. So I'd love for you to expand a little bit more on what it is that we mean by safety by design, if there's like specifics that you have, or some key questions that product leads should be asking themselves.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like, how are our young people experiencing these platforms and apps, and how are they walking through it? Is it the accurate way, like the best way for their health and wellness? Things like the algorithm that's delivering stuff to them. Things like time limits or warnings and explanations to them about, like, this isn't safe, or maybe you want to take a break, or, if you upload this, it could be shared beyond, like those kinds of things. Different experiences for different ages. I love, like, Instagram has rolled out like Instagram experiences for like the 13 to 15-year-old, the 15 to 17-year-old, and then adult. And that's so key. We fought for that for so many years. And I think that's key. So like kind of separating the age experiences. When Google has Gemini, their AI agent, and they deployed it into like all of their programs that are for under age 13. And it was just like a software update with a minor warning to parents that it was gonna happen. And I like got so upset. I was like, what are you doing, Google? I tried to do all this research about, well, how did they build it? Is it safer? Is the Gemini for my 10-year-old different than the Gemini that I use? I couldn't find any of that. So I had a meeting with Google, and I was like, all ready. And then they talked me through like how they really thoughtfully designed the Gemini product for the under 13s. And I was so happy the way they red teamed it. They tried to break it like extensively before. But now I'm like, Google, why aren't you telling us that you did that? Like everyone's unsure. Like, did you not? You're like, why aren't you? And also Google, if you share what you did, maybe we could get like Llama and OpenAI and all of the others to kind of meet these minimum standards too. So that's one of the things I'm working on right now. But that's what we mean by like intentional design based on the age and experiences and the wellness of our young people. So I think I'm a fan of Gemini. I still have it turned off for my little kids, but I'm feeling better about it.
Well, that's good. I mean, and in a way, it should be celebrated, right? Like these safe designs. And I think like, you know, I feel it's maybe a little bit like the movie industry. Like if a film is rated PG, nobody's going to go see it. So they just insert like some scenes to make it like higher rates so that it gains more in popularity. So I'm wondering if companies are also like that, right? Oh, if it's a teen version, it's not that great. But you know, it would be good to celebrate these types of designs, right? To, as parents, as users, as buyers, just like you just said, like you're a fan of Gemini because of this safe design that they've built into their algorithms and the products that they offer. And I feel like we're not quite there in celebrating that, but maybe that should become mainstream and should be part of what parents or, you know, consumer rewards groups are doing.
Well, and staying with this topic, but going back to something Dawn said just a moment ago, you were saying you've been doing this for 18 years and you haven't quite gotten to where you'd like to go. And I read a book once, I think it was called The Gap and the Gain, and the whole point was to measure backwards. And I just want to say you are crushing it because you've done so much good work. You've got so much great momentum with these online platforms, but also you've done tremendous work in the hotel industry. And I just want to say you're doing great work, and all this momentum is being created and generated by people especially like you. And it reminds me of, and Sylvie, what you just said, you know, designing it for the end user. And I used to be in the toy industry. I worked in the toy industry before I was in the philanthropy world. And the company I worked for had this slogan that in the US, we captured it as only the best is good enough. And I actually was speaking with the owner of the company, and they said it actually translates to even the best is not good enough for our children. And that was the company's mindset through and through the entire product line, every product experience. And incidentally, it's been the #1 brand in the world, not just in toys, but in all brands in the world. So it works to have children's best interest in mind. And that's what I think between the conversations you've had with these owners of these hotel chains and these platforms, these online platforms, what we're asking people to do is to step into leadership, and not because Congress tells you to do it, but it's because it's the right thing to do.
I have so many stories where that's happened, and my biggest plea to people is it feels like an uphill battle with policy. I just use that to put a fire under these companies to take action, but sometimes these companies just do it because we ask. I had a 15-year-old survivor of sex trafficking. I will probably cry as I tell you this story, but she was in Washington, D.C. She was exploited on Snapchat and then Instagram, and she told me, Dawn, I was targeted in DMs on Instagram. Why is Instagram letting adults who I don't even know send me messages? And I said, let's go tell Instagram that. She told the leaders at Instagram what her experience was and that of all the other survivors in her program in Washington, D.C. And it took a year, but a year later, Instagram stopped allowing direct messages from strangers on minor accounts. And I have so many stories like this where if we just raise our voices, whether it's like a local store or these kind of give feedback to these massive platforms, I do think they're listening and they're willing now. Like, we've made such a big ruckus that they are listening to us, and their parents too. Their parents too. And sadly, their families are not protected from these harms either.
And it's true that today's technology, just as you said before, allows for age verification without sharing necessarily personal information. So that's the beauty of that's what's wonderful about the new technologies that are available today that were not available in 1998, 27 years ago. I'd love for you to share, what's happening in the States, because there's a lot going on to fill the gaps, the voids that are left by the lack of really direct federal laws. And the states have been stepping in, which is not ideal because it's a patchwork of laws that make it very hard for companies to innovate, to deploy in each of the states. And but they're stepping in to protect their own citizens, to respond to the harm that is happening to the children in their state. And that's why. So I'd love for you mentioned it a little bit, but to explain that a little bit and how people can perhaps follow and engage with what's going on in their states, with the understanding that it needs to be at the federal level, that these laws need to be established.
Yeah, I mean, it's very encouraging, I'd say, what's happening at the state level. In 2023-24, there were, I know, like over 140 bills related to online safety. In 2025, I think there's something like 600. Most of them were AI related, but there were a lot others. What we're seeing are kind of buckets of effort. So there was the pornography age verification bills that passed in I think it's 22. We might be at 27 now. And then there's these schools and smartphones bills. I mean, these are solidly good at the state level. They should probably be at the state level. Digital literacy type bills, providing more funds or programs, curriculum to schools. And those are really critical and key, and every state needs them, and every state needs to be just continually innovating and adding to them. And then there's these kind of legal experiments. So what I'm very involved in right now is this App Store Accountability Act, where we would have age verification at the App Store level, and parents would be able to consent to whether their children download apps and sign complex contracts and these kinds of things. There's a federal version too, but we did pass it in 3 states, and I expect it to pass in probably 10 more states next year. There's age verification bills and the design type bills passing at the state level for social media. These are complicated from a constitutional perspective, hugely, but also complicated from how can you implement that just state by state versus federally or a kind of globally. I mean, I'm all for it. We just need to make it better. But where it happens is that's stuff going on right now. Yeah, I'm excited. On the AI front, there's a bunch of bills around the chatbots, around the AI generated content when it comes to nudifying apps or CSAM and those kinds of things. Very worried about harmful messages being told to kids. So most of the bills at the state level are focusing in that area when it comes to AI.
I'm wondering, are there bills that are around making you more in control of the content that is being posted, whether it's offensive content, sexual content, inaccurate content, but if there is any content that is about you that is being posted that you feel is not an accurate depiction of what's happening, it's surprising how hard it is to get those companies to take down videos or cyberbullying, mocking, things like that, that are being posted on their platforms, and you have no control over it. Are there anything going on at the state level around that, preventing people from posting or requiring companies to take down, if you ask them to take down content that's being posted on somebody else's account?
That's such a complicated area of law, of American kind of history too, like our ability to be able to speak about others, especially who are, in a political or a public space. So some of these laws, there have been laws introduced, but not really going anywhere. Some have been found unconstitutional in that space. It's so complicated, but I just believe something is needed. There are some bills moving, like federally, the Take It Down Act, that requires when it's like intimate material, sexual abuse material that's going up, that would require it to be taken down. But it's complicated otherwise, and I think that's an area where we should be fighting more, especially for young people who aren't consenting to like their entire everything about them being put online.
Melinda, do you want to talk a little bit about the task? Or it'd be good to talk about these task force in the states that are there that people should look up, right? I mean, there's several that are mentioned in the brief.
Especially because, the closer you get to something, or the closer it gets to you, the more likely you are to engage with it. So I'm interested in some of the things taking place, like Virginia's AI task force, Utah's Office of Families, and the National Governors Association, the National Governors Association's Youth Online Safety Collaborative. They're all trying to coordinate rather than reinvent the wheel. And I love the way that they're sharing information and best practices with each other. I'm also interested in the Let Grow and the Reasonable Childhood independence laws. Those remind us that offline freedom and online safety are in fact linked. So some of those things I would love, if you have more insight on those, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on those, Dawn.
I mean, I'm very encouraged by a lot of the things happening at the local level. Even up, like a lot of the tech companies are starting like youth policy councils, also advisory committees. I've suggested some youth to join. There's so many ways to help your voice be heard and to help shape this, especially in the AI space, you guys. Like, we're at the kind of beginning of this industry, and as parents and we care about our communities, we can help shape how our communities are going to use it. And so really encourage looking around and participating. Even like I just moved to a really small town in Idaho, and I'm learning everything, but I learned like even like the local city council and the school board is looking for advice when it comes to like AI and how our young people are engaging in tech at school. And so there's so many ways to get involved in that way.
I think you just have to pay attention, right? You just have to like start asking questions. And I think that's the whole purpose. Yeah, it's the whole purpose of this conversation, of this brief. It's like you become a little bit informed, so then you could show up and step up and perhaps lend your voice to these committees that try to establish guidelines. And also what the brief also tries to do is really connect people to other states, other initiatives that are doing it. The state of Virginia, for instance, is a big leader, especially in their school use of phone in the schools policy. Glenn Youngkin has been doing a lot, so this could be a real model state. And we're talking about the states, but I think let's touch, and let's not go too deep, but this is an issue because like the internet is not local, it's global. And these laws, we might have these local laws, but there's actually also a lot happening worldwide. And if we have what we've seen in Europe, companies are asking Europe to reduce the number of regulations, reduce to allow flourishment of entrepreneurship and AI innovation. And we have some, we have kind of much less regulations here in the US, and even more so in China, where there's no regulations at all in terms of what people can do with data. So I think it varies globally, and I'd love, Dawn, for you to share maybe a little bit of what's going on globally to balance protecting children, but also keeping a space that really fosters innovation.
There's kind of buckets of efforts, initiatives happening globally, and it's similar to what's happening here in the US, but because they don't have the First Amendment challenge or like the CDA 230 challenge, there's there's been a lot more movement abroad. So the EU and the UK have passed pretty sweeping solutions. Canada is likely to pass something later this year, early, in 2026. There's been a whole host of countries that are considering, and some have passed. Australia passed, New Zealand is likely to pass, bans on social media accounts for kids under certain ages, like 15 or 16. The Phones in Schools initiative, the Safety by Design. So the EU and UK and Canadian efforts are sweeping, focused on safety by design, and that's really key. A lot of age verification initiatives happening at the global level. The argument is how do we do some of these things? But there seems to be overwhelming consensus, even by tech now, finally, that something is needed in these areas, the safety by design space, the age verification space. So I'm very encouraged by what's happening globally. Again, it's after all these years, finally there's momentum and consensus that something has to happen. When it comes to AI, I think the more recent conversation has been do we regulate AI or not? Will we be able to flourish and allow it to innovate? And I land on, of course it needs to be able to flourish, but we don't have to trade kind of human dignity and child safety and child wellness for just profits and hegemony in that space. And so really thoughtfully trying to think through how do we do that. And it's hard finding the people who are willing to come to the table to have those conversations, but there are many, and I'm optimistic that tech is leading the way, along with Congress, along with global leaders. I'm still fighting very hard to stop a ban that would stop AI from being regulated at all, which Congress keeps trying to pass. But yeah, we can do both, I believe.
Well, and what I think I hear you saying is that whatever we do, we have to do something for our young people. And what we recognize is that 13 is not the right benchmark. And so when we're talking about adjusting sort of the filter, and we hear listeners talk about, or when listeners hear us talk about the age of 16, they know that they're not alone. It's not just them having this fight in their house with their children. They're not overreacting. It's their entire community feels this way. The state, the country is thinking this way. And we're seeing some really great examples of other countries taking the lead on this. And hopefully it sort of stirs up this competitive marketplace and everybody tries to outdo each other with the right thing.
This is such a big, complex issue, but I'd love to kind of wrap up our conversation here with let's talk about what people can do, right? And I like to, and I don't know, Don, what you think about this, but I like to think about the space. Whenever people choose engagement, it's you have to look at what needle, what dial do you want to move? Do you want to move into, really enforcing the laws that are in the book, getting people to be accountable, to push the safety by design? Do you want to equip parents, family, empower people to put the guardrails in for their family, their school, their children? What else? What are the different ways that people can really engage in this space to make a difference so that there's a good balance between regulations at the federal level, maybe the state level, maybe also in our own families, right, in what we do, and that make people feel that they're really empowered to make a difference.
I have this picture behind me, this river analogy, if you guys have heard this. Are you going to go upstream and try to solve the problem upstream, or are you going to try to help at kind of the grassroots level, one-on-one? And so really trying to figure out where your skill set is, where your passion is, where you're likely. I want to go as far upstream as I can. I know that's where I'm called to be an advocate, but I also realize, I have 5 kids, and I love this little community that I'm living in, and I need to do my part to help my kids and this local community learn about these issues. And so having conversations even within your family and in the small kind of one-on-one, the playground chats, those kinds of things that make such a huge difference when parents kind of join together and say we're not in it alone. We're all struggling. How do you manage this? What rules do you have? What conversations have you had? what do you know about the harms? It goes so far. So really kind of at that grassroots level, I'd say everyone should try to be active there. And then if you feel like you have capacity to go a little bit up, it can be like all in, like a career type effort, but it could also be things that just take like 1 minute. So a lot of organizations like Common Sense Media, Fair Play, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, who I used to be with, they have these very simple actions you can take where you send a message to your member of Congress, you send an email to this executive at Meta or wherever at Google, and those things take like literally 1 minute and they make a huge difference. So even if you're able to dabble upstream by sending these messages, signing these kinds of petitions, posting something online, writing a review, those things make a massive difference for the individual.
In my field, which is the philanthropic sector, we see philanthropy stepping up with funders like the Phillips Foundation, who are backing projects like the Child Safeguarding Lab and Safe Childhood Symposium, and also advocating for non-disclosure agreements to be void in the case of abuse.
Also, I'd love to encourage everyone to use the Policy Circle brief on protecting children online to use as a conversation, whether it's in your employee resource group, that you could use it to have a discussion about a product, understand the bigger picture, and also to drive conversations with community groups right there where you are. There's an organization, someone mentioned to me, it's called Wait for 8, which is a coalition of small parents group in the community where they all agree and sign a pledge to say we're going to wait until 8th grade to give our kids a phone. And it could be like, actually, maybe you should wait until you're driving to get a phone. You're 16 to get a phone. Maybe that's where we move up the age to get a phone. But I think this is not something that a single family can take on. You can have your own rules, but it's worth also engaging with other families too, and people around you, and even friends, and bringing this conversation into the public. So I want to wrap us up. Thank you guys for joining. This was an in-depth conversation. We covered a lot.
I love talking to you.
I know, it's great. We covered so much. Dawn, where can people find you if they want to follow your work, your advocacy efforts, and also your thought leadership on this?
That's great. I'm on LinkedIn, and I recently started a Substack called Child Proofed, where I'm specifically talking about AI and child wellness, parent tips, policy things like that.
Amazing. Well, thank you. Melinda, do you have a favorite organization that does advocacy and provides information that you want to share?
Not specifically, but I do want to say, Dawn, you made a point in the middle of this conversation about connecting with kids and actually getting them involved in their schools. And I think that is a key point, because they're the ones that we're talking about and they should have a voice in it. And I know in my children's school, there's so many different after school programs and in-school programs that they can engage with. Like I think there's United Nation and Student Council and all kinds of different organizations, but this should be one of them. And I think that's what I am taking away from this, is it's not just up to the legislators and the tech industry and the parents at large. It's also up to the kids. I think they should have a voice in it.
I think for me, it's really like this preventing exposure to this content that's harmful is really something that I want to, like you, Dawn, would like to work upstream. So, well, thank you both for joining this conversation. Thank you, listeners. If you like the show, I invite you to rate it, share it, talk about this important topic, and stay curious and trust your voice. Until next time.